In order for us to talk about API chaining, we must first talk about the API object. And in order for us to talk about the API object, we must first talk about the API request and response. When an API request is made, the request comes into what is commonly referred to as a front controller. At the front controller, it parses the URI from the request in order to forward to a controller action to complete the request. At the controller action, the request data may be validated a variety of ways, via an ORM object, a command object, or perhaps some other way. This validation, however, is not dry, as it happens at the controller level for every get, put, post, delete for the request and the response. This is mainly because it is handled by the model, which also handles the processing of the data. Also, role privilege checking and rule checking in an atomic manner cannot be done at the controller. To do this, it has to be done at the front controller, and this requires an abstraction of the API layer away from the model and the generation of the data itself. So how do we abstract the API layer? By adding an API object to the front controller that handles the definitions and the rules of the API object associated with the URI being called. This would allow us to validate the request data, validate the response data, abstract validation from the controller, have role and privilege atomicity, have rules atomicity, have definition atomicity, have mock data for the API docs, and consolidate and abstract the API logic. In this paradigm, we break with the old mindset of thinking of URLs associated with data and start thinking of URLs associated with objects that define that data and the rules for accessing said data, thus creating reusable objects and rules for our APIs. Once we associate APIs with objects, we can start linking our objects through their associated URI. And this brings us to API chaining.